Imagine, for a moment, plunging your bare hands into a boiling vat of stale, fermented urine and corrosive ash. Your skin is blistering, cracking, and peeling away. And this is just the beginning of your day. Soon, you will have to drag nearly 100 pounds of soaking wet, freezing wool down a steep, muddy embankment to a fast-moving river, where a single slip on a mossy rock means being dragged to the bottom, drowning in water, tainted with human waste and animal blood. You are not a prisoner in a medieval torture dungeon. You haven't been condemned to a grueling execution. You are simply a 14th century woman trying to do the household laundry. For us living in the modern world, laundry day is a minor, forgettable chore. It's cured by throwing clothes into a metal box, pouring in a cup of blue liquid that smells like synthetic spring rain, and pressing a button. But in the Middle Ages, securing clean clothes was not a chore. It was a brutal, toxic, and genuinely lethal battle for survival. Today, we are stripping away the romanticized Hollywood illusion of medieval life, the shiny knights and the pristine queens, to reveal the gritty, skin-melting, and terrifying reality of the Great Wash. Why did a simple desire for cleanliness claim the lives of countless unsung women? The answer lies in a deadly combination of biology, chemistry, and the unforgiving wrath of nature. To truly comprehend why washing clothes was effectively a death sentence, you first have to understand what the people of the 1300s were actually wearing. Forget the lightweight cotton blends, the spandex, or the breathable synthetic fabrics we take for granted today. The medieval European wardrobe was dominated by one overwhelming material: thick, coarse, heavily woven wool. Wool was an incredible insulator, essential for surviving the brutal, bone-chilling European winters before the invention of central heating. But as a fabric, it acted exactly like a giant, absorbent sponge. A standard medieval wool dress, layered with heavy undertunics, thick cloaks, and woolen stockings, could easily weigh over 10 to 15 pounds when completely dry. Now, imagine what happens when that fabric gets dirty. And in the Middle Ages, everything was dirty. The air was thick with wood smoke from open hearths, coating every thread in a layer of greasy soot. There were no paved roads, only rivers of mud and animal excrement. People worked closely with livestock, meaning their clothes were constantly absorbing sweat, animal fat, blood, and the inevitable grime of agricultural labor. When submerged in water, the weight of this densely woven wool multiplied exponentially. We are not talking about a heavy sweater. We are talking about 50 to 80 pounds of dead, sloshing weight that a washerwoman had to manually haul, scrub, wring out by hand, and carry over long distances. But you couldn't just use river water to get months of accumulated grease and human sweat out of these heavy fibers. You needed soap. And this is where the medieval laundry process turns into a horrifying chemical hazard. You couldn't go to a local apothecary to buy a gentle, lavender-scented bar of soap. Soap existed, but it was an extreme luxury reserved for the wealthiest nobles. And even then, it was mostly used for bodies, not mountains of heavy laundry. The average peasant or townswoman had to manufacture her own industrial degreaser, using the most abrasive, violently reactive materials available in a medieval village. The primary cleaning agent of the 1300s was known as lye. To To make a basic lye solution, women would take hardwood ash, specifically from oak or beech fires, and steep it in water to extract potassium hydroxide. But basic ash water wasn't strong enough to break down the stubborn, hardened grease, the embedded dirt, and the dark, set-in stains of medieval life. To make it truly effective, they needed a powerful source of ammonia. And what was the cheapest, most abundant, and most reliable source of ammonia in a 14th century settlement? It was stale, fermenting human urine. Families would literally save their daily urine in large ceramic pots, known as chamber pots, accumulating it over weeks or even months. They would let it sit in the corner of their drafty homes, fermenting until the urea broke down into ammonia. The smell was so concentrated, so pungent and eye-watering, that it could practically strip the paint off a wall. This fermented urine, affectionately known as chamber lye, was particularly prized for its ability to bleach linens white and remove the most stubborn biological stains, including menstrual blood, in an era before sanitary products existed. This toxic biochemical cocktail of caustic ash, lye, and fermented urine was then heated in massive iron cauldrons over roaring open fires. The washerwomen, often called lavenders, had no rubber gloves, no protective eyewear, and no safety protocols. They had to plunge their bare hands and forearms directly into this boiling, highly alkaline mixture to agitate the clothes. Lye is a highly corrosive substance. Prolonged exposure does exactly what it is designed to do. It breaks down organic matter. It strips away the skin's natural protective oils immediately. Over the course of a washing day, a woman's hands would suffer severe contact dermatitis, chemical burns, and deep, painful fissures. Their skin would turn red, raw, and peel away in chunks. They were, quite literally, melting their own flesh off just to break down the dirt in their family's wool tunics. But incredibly, the excruciating chemical burns were only the beginning of the nightmare. Once the clothes were chemically treated, the real danger was waiting for them outside the village. Because homes didn't have running water or drainage systems, the entire washing process had to be relocated to the nearest body of water, a river or a fast-moving stream. This was not a peaceful, idyllic nature walk. The riverbanks of medieval Europe were perilous, untamed environments. Women had to load those massive 80-pound baskets of wet, lye-soaked wool onto their backs or hips and navigate down steep, muddy, and incredibly slippery slopes. Once at the water's edge, they had to wade in. Imagine standing knee-deep in a freezing English river in the middle of November. The water temperature was barely above freezing. Hypothermia was a constant, creeping threat, numbing their legs until they could no longer feel their toes. To get the corrosive soap and the loosened dirt out of the heavy fabrics, they couldn't just gently rinse them. They used heavy wooden bats, commonly called washing beetles. They would lay the massive garments over flat river stones and violently beat the clothes. Raise the bat, strike, raise the bat, strike, for hours on end. The physical biomechanics of this action were devastating. It tore at the rotator cuffs, destroyed the cartilage in the shoulders, and compressed the spine. The sheer physical exhaustion alone was enough to cause heart failure or fatal strokes in older women. But the most common cause of laundry-related death was much more abrupt and much more violent. Rivers are inherently unpredictable. a sudden shift in the current, a momentary loss of balance on a moss-covered stone, or simply getting tangled while wrestling with a 30-pound wet wool blanket caught in an eddy, could drag a woman under in an instant. Remember, the washerwomen themselves were wearing long, heavy wool dresses. The moment those dresses hit the water, they waterlogged, acting like an anchor made of lead. Swimming, even if they knew how, which almost none of them did, was biologically and physically impossible. Once a woman slipped beneath the freezing, turbulent surface, the weight of her own clothes dragged her straight to the riverbed. The historical records from this era are terrifying. Coroners' rolls from 13th and 14th century England are chillingly packed with the brief, tragic records of women who went down to the river to wash clothes and never returned. Their bodies would be found miles downstream days later, bloated and battered against the rocks. Drowning while doing the laundry was one of the leading causes of accidental death for women in the Middle Ages. And yet, if the crushing current didn't kill you, the water itself was hiding a slower, more agonizing executioner. We look at rivers today as symbols of nature, life, and purity. In the 1300s, rivers were the central nervous system of urban and agricultural waste disposal. The exact same water these women were standing in, immersing their hands in, and washing their clothes in, was an apocalyptic biological hazard. Upstream, the local butcher was dumping rotting animal guts and coagulated blood. The town tanner was washing diseased animal skins using toxic chemicals and dog feces. And the entire village's raw sewage, human waste, and agricultural runoff eventually drained into this very water source. Now, remember those raw, bleeding hands and the deep chemical fissures caused by the boiling lye in Act 2? Every single open wound was a direct, unguarded gateway for the lethal bacteria thriving in the river. Washerwomen were plunging open, bleeding flesh directly into medieval Europe's toilet. A simple, unnoticed scratch from a sharp river stone, combined with the bacteria-infested water, was a death sentence. Without antibiotics, without sterile bandages, and without any understanding of germ theory, that small scratch would quickly become infected. It would lead to severe blood poisoning, sepsis, or fatal gangrene. Women would return from the river shivering, develop a raging fever the next day, and be dead within a week. A slow, agonizing death resulting from a Tuesday laundry session. They also frequently contracted waterborne diseases like dysentery and cholera just from the contaminated droplets splashing onto their faces and lips. Because the process was so incredibly physically demanding, time-consuming, and overwhelmingly dangerous, doing the laundry was not a weekly event. It was a massive, highly orchestrated community operation known as the Great Wash, occurring perhaps only 2 or 3 times a year in many households. In between these massive washes, people relied on vigorously brushing the dry dirt off their outer wool garments, masking body odors with herbs, and frequently changing their linen undergarments, the layer closest to the skin, hoping the linen would absorb the sweat. But when the Great Wash finally came, it was an all-hands-on-deck, military-style operation for the women of the village. It took days of preparation, boiling, beating, rinsing, and dragging heavy fabrics. It was back-breaking labor that aged women prematurely, leaving them with chronic joint pain, lung issues from inhaling caustic smoke, and bodies permanently battered by the elements. When we look back at the Middle Ages, our history books are filled with the names of kings who fought in shiny armor, knights who died on glorious battlefields, and lords who built massive, towering castles. But true survival in this dark, unforgiving era wasn't just about wielding a sword or building a wall. It was about the silent, undocumented army of women who faced down freezing waters, toxic chemicals, and invisible biological horrors, armed with nothing but a wooden bat, a vat of ashes, and unimaginable resilience. They didn't get medals. They didn't get statues. They didn't get their names written in the chronicles of history. But without their brutal, agonizing labor, medieval society would have entirely collapsed under the weight of its own filth, grease, and disease. They risked their lives, quite literally, so humanity could stay just clean enough to survive. If this story changed the way you look at history and makes you look at your washing machine with a newfound profound respect, hit that subscribe button right now. We dive into the dark, untold, and terrifying realities of the past every single week. Drop a comment below. What modern convenience are you most grateful for after hearing what these women went through? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.